All right. Welcome, everybody, to the Finance Essentials with Danny Hudson podcast. I am your host, Danny Hudson. We appreciate you guys all being here today. I know that this will actually be the last show before Christmas. So if you guys are out there, I hope you all have a great Christmas holiday. Hope you get everything you want. Hopefully Santa packs your stocking and your tree with all the gifts that you'd like. But yeah, so this is our podcast this week. I'm super excited. I actually get very excited whenever I learn new things and I get to research new topics and that I wasn't very familiar with, and so that always kind of gets me excited. I think years ago, whenever I was a kid, if you were really into video games and D&D, that kind of thing, that kind of made you a nerd. And now I think, especially with the new Marvel movies and stuff, I think that's more normal now. Now I think the nerdy part is whenever you learn some new economic and business trends and things. I think that kind of makes you more of a nerd these days. But yeah, so I learned some new things researching the show for today, and so I'm super excited about that, and hopefully I'll be able to share some of that and convey the message properly, and you guys will also be as excited to learn about it as me. But first, let me thank you guys again for tuning in on a weekly basis. It means the world to me. I get a lot of great feedback every week. And by all means, please feel free to keep it going. Like we mentioned on previous shows, if you guys have social media, we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're on LinkedIn. I typically tend to post daily content. But one of the things also, too, that would be very helpful for me is if you go over to the website, that's financeessentials.io. Sign up for the cheat sheet and the newsletter on the home page, and then that way you'll actually start to receive generally weekly emails or so from me with some updates, some news of what's going on with the business as well as with the show and all those kinds of things. So that's super helpful for me. Just to give you guys a heads up, the podcast is also on Spotify as well as iTunes and on YouTube. So like, subscribe, share. I'm actually in the process of putting together a bit of a competition. I'm in the process of acquiring some prizes for people who do share and subscribe and leave some comments. And so I'm trying to figure out how to implement that, but I'm hoping that I'll be able to receive those gifts here relatively soon. I've also got a ton of great feedback for January, which is Entrepreneur Month, where I intend to kind of interview people in different types of businesses, understand how their business works, how they started, how COVID has impacted it, and then obviously too how that can tie in financially as well, and really be able to drive that point home when it comes to really trying to achieve and strive for your financial freedom and your financial success, to be able to help you reach your long-term financial goals. So on to today's show. Right. So on to today's show, again, like I said, I'm super excited about this one. I don't know if you guys are very familiar with the company DoorDash, and so the show today is going to be structured around DoorDash and the services that it provides, and whether or not it's actually good for restaurants and local businesses. Now, it's not necessarily specific to DoorDash. Obviously, there are competitors and other companies that are in that same market. But because it's only about a half an hour long show, I don't have the ability to be able to break down every single one. So I pick on DoorDash because they recently IPO'd. They're kind of the big dog on the block, with over half of the total market share. So I kind of use them as an example. But think about this in relative terms versus pretty much all of their competitors and all third-party delivery apps, delivery services, that kind of thing. So I'm going to be referencing to DoorDash, but this doesn't necessarily mean that it's specific and only to DoorDash. So the starting article that I'm using this week is actually from CNN, and it's by the author's name is Sarah Ashley O'Brien, and the title of it is "The Pandemic Boosted Food Delivery Companies. Soon They May Face a Reality Check," which I don't think is that big of a surprise for a lot of us. I know a lot of us were very unsure about what was going on back in March, April, May, that kind of time frame. If your business is anything like my business, April and May were essentially a standstill because nobody had any idea of what was going on. So to go into the article, what she says is, she says, at the start of 2020, it looked like the food delivery sector was about to face a reckoning after years of raising and losing billions of dollars. One of the original food delivery businesses, Grubhub, was considering putting itself up for sale after losing its foothold on the market. Its competitors, DoorDash, Postmates, and Uber Eats, had also reportedly been talking about mergers. Meanwhile, Uber's CEO signaled a fundamental shift for its meal delivery service, which is focusing on profitable growth. Then the pandemic changed everything. The health crisis paired with the economic crisis created a perfect storm for the delivery companies, a large pipeline of the newly employed looking for work, countless people staying at home, having food delivered, and restaurants increasingly dependent on takeout and delivery. So essentially what she is saying here is a lot of these companies were losing money. A lot of people weren't necessarily using these services. And so they're talking about mergers and acquisitions, because generally the way it works out is, and you guys may actually see this with Uber and Lyft, maybe not them specifically, but other smaller competitors, is that when a business model is not really that profitable, or they don't really have a way of being able to make money, what you'll find is there generally tends to be a bit of consolidation. And the reason for that is because, and we may talk about this a little bit later, well, maybe I'll just go ahead and touch on it now. But the way that that'll end up working out is you have customers that have, and I'll just make up some numbers here, but we'll say DoorDash has 40% market share because they are available in these 1,000 cities, in these 10 countries, so on and so forth. Now, Caviar, they cater to, and this is actually a company that DoorDash acquired, but they cater towards this market here in these cities, for this demographic and so on and so forth. And so what DoorDash would do is they would say, well, rather than us spending $10 billion trying to get into this market and these cities and, and competing against Caviar, we'll just buy them for $1 billion. And then that will add to our portfolio of businesses. And now we have access to this market with this demographic, with these businesses, and so on and so forth. So that generally tends to happen. Now, it can obviously happen in profitable businesses as well. But generally, whenever companies are losing money or they're really trying to grow, which I know that typically tends to be one of the big complaints about Uber and Lyft, is that the companies actually lose a lot. They lose a lot of money, but the logic there is that they're subsidizing these rides to keep them artificially low to grow their market share. So similar business concept here. And then whenever a lot of these businesses aren't very profitable, but they want to, and then other ones that are bigger and they want to increase their market share without spending all the money on the marketing, and the expansion and the growth goals, they'll just go out and acquire a company. And so DoorDash basically did that with Caviar, but also too, what Sarah is saying here is that a lot of these companies weren't actually making a lot of money, and then when the pandemic hit, when COVID hit, no one was leaving, right? And so they saw that as an opportunity to really push for home delivery services. And a lot of people were thinking, well, I might not want to go out to eat, but I still love so-and-so restaurant. I'm craving that tonight. I'll go ahead and order DoorDash, and then that way it'll be delivered to my house. And so that's when a lot of these delivery companies actually saw exponential growth. And one of the things that we might touch on a little bit later in the show, but I'll go ahead and touch on it now, is that DoorDash recently IPO'd. They IPO'd actually at $182 per share. But the thought there is that some of these companies may not necessarily have IPO'd as early as they did if it wasn't for the pandemic, right? Because the pandemic for a delivery service, company is actually going to make your bottom line look really good. One of the things that I did some research on is that I found out that, like most of these companies, DoorDash was not very profitable. They did post profitability in Q2 of 2020, which makes sense again, right? March, April, May, no one is leaving their houses because no one knows what's going on. And then they went back to losing money again in Q3. So they IPO'd at $182. They're currently, last I checked as of yesterday, they were currently trading at about $156, with a total market cap of about $50 billion. $50 billion. To give you guys a little bit of an idea, keep in mind this is a delivery company where their entire business model is connecting you to a restaurant, you ordering through their app, and then they use their dashers, which is essentially kind of their drivers, to pick that food up and deliver it to your home. And they have a market cap of about $50 billion. That's their model, right? That's their business. They don't own restaurants. They don't really have a lot of quote unquote employees. However, that business works. And they have a market cap of about $50 billion. To give you a little bit of an insight in terms of what that means and why tech is very inflated in terms of its total market cap. Grubhub, which is their primary competitor, now they do a significant more business than Grubhub, is at $73 per share with a market cap of about $7 billion. But to give you guys some ideas as far as market cap for traditional brick and mortar restaurants and brands that people are very familiar with. Domino's Pizza market cap is at about 16 billion. McDonald's is actually at 160 billion. So if you think of all the McDonald's that you've ever come across, that you've ever seen, DoorDash is valued at approximately 1/3 of McDonald's. So this company where literally their entire business is an app and they deliver food, they're valued at approximately 1/3 of McDonald's. But Chipotle is 40 billion, so DoorDash is actually valued at more than Chipotle. And then Dine Brands, which is Applebee's, IHOP, several other smaller chains. I guess Applebee's and IHOP aren't that smaller, but they're estimated at about 1 billion. And then Darden, which is your Olive Gardens, your Longhorns. Most people are very familiar with Darden as a brand. Their value is at about 16 billion. So DoorDash is approximately 3 times as valuable as Darden. So that part was very interesting to me. I've known that tech generally tends to be overinflated, well, at least in my opinion, overinflated in terms of market cap and valuation. But this one is very interesting. I know Airbnb also too recently went public, and at one point in time, and I don't know if it still rings true, but at one point in time, Airbnb, again, they don't actually hold any assets, but their valuation was worth more than all of the publicly traded hotel brands. So your hotels, your Marriott hotels, your Hiltons, your Choices, Airbnb was actually valued at more than all of those combined. So, take that as you will and understand as far as investing goes, maybe that doesn't make sense. Maybe it makes sense. But I thought it was very interesting. And one of the other points too that Sarah brought up in the article, again talking about Airbnb, is that Airbnb, they were looking at the valuation based off of when the pandemic ends and the boost that they'll see. But DoorDash, just like we talked about with their third quarter performances, is how much is DoorDash bottom line actually going to be hurt when the pandemic ends, right? So when people actually start going back out and venturing out into the restaurants again, and they're not necessarily paying a lot of these exorbitant fees and stuff to have their food delivered. So like we mentioned before, DoorDash actually purchased Caviar. Now, Caviar was a service that generally catered a little bit more towards higher end restaurants. DoorDash generally tends to be a little bit more of your chains, more of your casual restaurants that people are a little bit more familiar with. And so they purchased Caviar to, like we said before, right, where they can now get into a market that they weren't necessarily in before without having to spend all of the money to create a competitor to Caviar. One of the things too that Sarah mentioned that I thought was a great point is the heavy scrutiny. And this is the point that really kind of made my financial wheels turn, like I usually talk about in the show, that makes me want to dive deeper and understand more, is the high fees, the high commissions that DoorDash and its competitors were costing businesses during the pandemic, right? So a lot of these companies, they're like, we're going to shut down. We can't have people in. How are we going to make any money? And then, these delivery services are offering their services, but they're also, charging high commissions. And so that really came under a lot of scrutiny during the pandemic. And as a lot of you guys are probably aware, or maybe you're not aware, but there have been local and state regulations that have actually capped some of those commissions. So they really got a lot of heat during the pandemic based off of those commissions. One of the other things too that I thought was very interesting about DoorDash, and again, I'm assuming that this is probably some of their competitors as well, is that as they were growing, what they were actually doing is they were actually go ahead and putting their menus on their website from these local restaurants and these local businesses, and people were purchasing them, purchasing food and so on and so forth from DoorDash, and then their drivers were just going up and picking them up from the restaurant and then delivering them, and then these restaurants were like, wait a second, who are these people that are picking up this food and then they're delivering it? Like, people aren't calling and ordering delivery. What's going on here? And so they were actually sued, by a group of restaurants. And so they don't do that anymore. So they do actually need to create partnerships and that kind of thing. But at one point in time, people were just showing up to the restaurant and they were delivering food, and the people were like, what the hell is going on? Who are these people that are picking up this food now? So I thought that was that was very interesting. And then also too, learning a little bit about some of their competitors from Sarah. So Uber Eats, Postmates, Grubhub, which I know we talked a little bit about, Caviar, which was actually purchased by DoorDash, and then Seamless. And Seamless was one that I had not heard of before. It is a part of Grubhub, and most of these competitors are going to be different markets. They're going to be aimed at different demographics, and so that's why some of these you guys may not have heard of, because they're not necessarily as universal as DoorDash. And so one of the other things too that I started to read about, and this is the part, like I mentioned before, was the high commissions, right? Because one of the things, and I don't believe that I'm alone here, I think a lot of you guys probably fall into this same boat, is that we're attempting to do what we can to try to help out local businesses. If we've got the means to do it, we want to try to help out local businesses. And so what I wanted to learn about was what is DoorDash's business model, right? If governments are stepping in because they're claiming that these commissions are too high, which again, that's up for debate. They don't have to sign on with DoorDash if they don't want to, but what does that mean? What is DoorDash's business model? How do they make money? Is it from these exorbitant commissions that people are saying that they're paying? And so I did a little bit of diving and try to understand how DoorDash and the delivery services actually make money. And their revenue streams are essentially twofold. There's probably some marketing and advertising on DoorDash from local establishments that they probably also make money on, similar to if any of you guys have run Google ads or any kind of ads, really. You pay to kind of get to the top of the search engine, that kind of thing. And so there probably is also some revenue for that. Kind of like Yelp, you can be a premium. So if somebody searches up Chinese food, that your Chinese restaurant appears at the top because you paid to be there. Expedia does a lot of that. They actually have a massive budget to do that kind of thing. So that is part of it. But their revenue is basically built into two pieces. It's the delivery fees, which if you guys have used any third-party delivery apps, you basically pay a delivery fee, and then it's also the commissions. Now the delivery fee, if you bought pizza and had it delivered, the delivery fee is not something that I think surprises people. But the delivery fee can range from $2 to $6, whatever it might be. It's kind of similar to like surge pricing, whenever you're getting an Uber or a Lyft. If it's in more demand and they need more drivers, then the delivery fees are there to kind of help entice drivers to kind of do it, deliver a little bit more. But their commissions was the part that I was unsure about, right? Because it makes sense that they would charge a restaurant commissions, but what is that number? And so what I found is that their commissions can be up to 30%, which if you guys have been following along and listening to prior shows where we've actually discussed profit margins for restaurants, there are very few restaurants that can survive a 30% commission. So the easiest way to think about that is that if you order through DoorDash or Uber Eats or whatever it might be, and your bill came out to be $20, and then you pay a delivery fee on top of that. But if the bill came out to be $20, $6 of that is actually, if it's 30%, it may not be 30%, but we'll just use 30%. $6 of that commission is actually going to be going to DoorDash or Uber Eats or whoever you're using. So a restaurant who is probably already only making, say, 10% gross margin ish, maybe a little bit higher on gross margin, but they might break even, or they might actually be losing money on that transaction that was done through DoorDash. So a few of the benefits that the restaurant would have is that if they were offering delivery, they're not having to pay a delivery driver. And so there is some overhead savings that the restaurant would do. But again, 30% in terms of commissions is massive. And so I was thinking, again, this is my finance wheels turning here, is that, well, how are businesses reacting to that? How is that actually impacting the businesses themselves? Because the way that I think about this is that it's in a pandemic, right? So you can't have people inside. Depending upon what state you're in, you can't even have people outside. If you weren't offering delivery before, is this a necessary service that you have to survive? So essentially, you're just hoping that your commissions will allow you to be able to at least break even, right? And maybe you don't even necessarily need to make money. You're just thinking, oh my gosh, I have to figure out a way of at least breaking even, so at least that way I can keep my lights on. And so I found another article, and I'm sure it's probably not consistent across all businesses, but this one I thought really stood out, and it was very interesting to read about. And it was another article from CNN, and it was about a restaurant specifically in New York City. But the title of it was, "Some Restaurants Hate Delivery Apps Like Grubhub and Uber Eats, so they're seeking out alternatives," which again, as we talk about on this show a lot, is pivoting your business, controlling the source of your income, and really diversifying your revenue stream. So the title really stood out because I'm like, oh man, alternatives, that sounds like a great idea. And so it was about a restaurant in New York, and the owner was Matthew Palambino. If you're listening to the show, Matthew, I apologize. I probably butchered your name some. But what he says is that the worst thing that has ever happened to us is them. And so he owned a small New York City-based pizza chain. And he says that we can't get rid of them because they are at this point our primary revenue stream. And he says that it's up to 80%. So 80% of their business is now driven through, which they were talking about was Seamless, right? So Seamless is kind of a subsidiary of Grubhub, but it's again a third-party delivery. And so what he's basically saying is that we can't get rid of them at this point because they make up 80% of our revenue, but they're the worst thing that's ever happened to us because we can't make any money. And so reading about how this played out is that what Matthew and other businesses are starting to do, and maybe you guys are seeing this in your marketplace as well, is that they're offering incentives to customers to actually not purchase food and deliveries through the third-party apps. Now, how some restaurants and some businesses are doing this is rather than having a wait staff, they're converting some of the wait staff into delivery drivers, so that way they can kind of do their own delivery. Some restaurants and businesses, what they're doing is they're offering kind of a reward system. So for example, you purchase 3 pizzas and then you get the 4th pizza free if you purchase it directly through them. Another industry that really started to do this several years ago was hotels, right? So if you're seeing commercials for Hilton or for Marriott, they guarantee best price, is found on their website, that they'll beat any third-party site. And the reason that they market that way, and the reason why they're pushing that messaging, is because of the commissions that they have to pay out on the back end to these third-party services. So they make a lot more money when you actually book it through them. And again, they talk about, the commissions up to 30%. But another thing that they actually brought about that Sarah didn't talk about earlier is the customer data, right? So now a lot of these third-party delivery apps have a lot of customer data, and so they're able to track spending habits, they're able to track demographic data, they're able to track a lot of additional data and use that. Whereas a lot of the restaurants themselves at that point are kind of left out in the dark. And so a lot of businesses are trying to do what they can to avoid using third parties, because it actually could cost them money in the long run. So it's more convenient for us, but it actually costs the restaurants and the businesses themselves. One of the big things that's been very popular, that's taken off, has been like curbside delivery. So that actually would help the business directly, because then all they're doing is just bringing it out to your car, but also self pickup, and DIY. And so one of the things too, that now again, it's not to say that these third-party services are all bad. One of the things that they have actually done is, again, they've increased these businesses' revenues, right? And so some of these businesses may not have been able to survive if they didn't have the third-party services. But what they've also done too is they've also done tiered adjustments. So for example, Uber Eats might charge a 30% delivery fee if they are doing end-to-end delivery, right? So if you order it through the app, an Uber Eats driver picks it up, they deliver it to your home, they charge 30%. What they've also done too is that they've adjusted that. So say what they would do is if the restaurant wanted to use its own drivers. So like we mentioned previously, where the restaurant might actually convert some of their staff to delivery drivers to help cut down. But say you still purchase the food through Uber Eats. Well, then they would only charge, say, like a 15% commission. And then if you actually ordered it through the third party and then you actually offered to pick up, they wouldn't charge any commission at all. Another thing too that some of the third-party apps have done, like DoorDash did this, where they would bring on people onto the platform during the pandemic, and they wouldn't charge people kind of I wouldn't say an initiation fee, but a startup fee, right? So they would put them on the platform, they would allow them to use their services, they wouldn't charge them a fee to get set up. Now, personally, I look at that and I think that's actually very smart on DoorDash's perspective and from their business idea, because I look at that and I think that's basically a way to get all of the businesses that you can onto your platform during a pandemic, right? During a time period where no one is actually going out to eat. And now whenever people start going out, they have become accustomed, and now it's habitually where they're ordering it through it. So they basically have let all of these restaurants on the platform in the hopes that once people then are more able to go out or more comfortable going out, that because they now have this habit of ordering through there, that they will continue to do so. So even though that they've actually onboarded a lot of companies and partners onto the platform, it is also a bit self-serving, for DoorDash's perspective as well. And then one of the other things too that I found doing some research is, and as we talk about on here, and we talk about value creation, and we talk about capitalism, and we talk about economics, is that if you're a company and you're charging a 30% commission, to a company for a service that you're providing, that could lead to a healthy margin if done correctly, right? Again, we talk about DoorDash actually losing money. They were really only profitable during one period, but that also could be due to scale, right? As they're trying to grow, increase market share, so on and so forth, that they're actually losing money for that reason, not necessarily because it's an unprofitable business model. So another small company, and I'm sure that there are others that pop up, around the country, is Chomp. Chomp was started in Iowa, and their commissions is 20%. Right. So what they're doing is they're more of a local business, and they partner more specifically local companies. And one of their incentives of working with those guys is saying, hey, you could use Grubhub, but they charge you 30%. You can use us. We're also locally owned. We're local here in Iowa, and we're only going to charge you 20%. And so what you may also find too is that other companies, and I'm sure they exist, would look to get into that marketplace by offering some lower commissions. And Chomp at that point in time could potentially even use a smaller amount of full-time employees of whatever it might be to be able to deliver that, rather than having to use the massive back-end scaling tech aspect of Grubhub, where they're pairing up deliveries with drivers, and stuff like that, kind of like the way that Uber and Lyft does. So all in all, while these third-party services and apps, they do provide a great convenient service for a lot of us who do choose to eat more at home rather than going out, or maybe you don't have the option. Here in Tennessee, you can go out to basically almost any restaurants. Most restaurants, even though I don't think it's mandated, they still will space people out. So it's not at 100% capacity, but you can go out, you can eat. But I know some places aren't necessarily that lucky. So you might not have a choice. But one of the things, and the reason why I really wanted to do an episode on this, is because I don't think a lot of people understand and really are able to contemplate how much this type of a service could actually cost the people that we really want to help. A lot of us are purchasing meals and food from these businesses because we think, hey, we want to do what we can to help out Joe's Tacos on the corner. And so by ordering, their food, we're helping them to stay in business. But we don't understand, what kind of fees and delivery charges that really go into it. And so I wanted to do an episode on this. And part of the reason why too is that one of the gentlemen that I've started following on Twitter, which is Chef Andrew Gruel, he's relatively famous. I think he had a show on the Food Network. Chef, if you're listening, I apologize. I don't know specifically as far as what it was. But one of the things that he started to do was he started to start a fund to help people in the hospitality industry, the restaurant business, that have really been impacted by the pandemic. Now, he's in California, where California at this point, you can't really do anything. I know we've talked in prior podcasts about my feelings on how they're treating their restaurant and hospitality businesses in California. And so what he's doing is he's trying to help raise money to give directly to those people that were impacted by the pandemic. And so last I checked, he's up to like $60,000, which is great. One of the things that I would obviously recommend to you guys doing is that if you're listening to this, if you are getting that stimulus check, and maybe you don't necessarily need all of that money, maybe you're like me and you haven't actually missed a paycheck during the pandemic, that there are people like him and like the people that he's trying to help that could really help, use some of those additional funds. And if not, that's okay too. But, maybe what you do instead is that you actually use the money that you're getting to help support, some of your local businesses, some of your local restaurants. And the easiest way to be able to do that is to purchase directly from them, whether they use their own delivery drivers, or maybe they actually, you go pick it up, right? Something along those lines. Those types of things is what would really help those businesses to be able to survive these lockdowns, because these lockdowns are basically shutting down, again, as we've talked about in previous shows, large segments of the business world. And so that's the big thing that I would really learn about, that I learned doing this show. And one of the things that I would really recommend, and how that affects us, right? Because there are a lot of people that are listening that are restaurant owners or restaurant employees, and they're impacted directly by these shutdowns. And if we really want to work together, and that's what we really want to promote on this show, is really helping each other and not necessarily rely on government and other actions taken by additional parties to really help make ourselves and our communities and those around us better. And so that's what I would recommend, again, to you guys and how that impacts us. I really appreciate you guys tuning in this week. It really means a lot to me. I hope you guys all have a Merry Christmas. Again, if you got something out of this show, by all means, please feel free to share it, like it, subscribe, do those kinds of things, and then follow us on social media. We really appreciate it, and we'll talk to you guys again later. All right, bye.